Hi, I'm Linda Cleary, Editor and Publishing Lead of the Literary Department at Hypatia Publications. And I'm here to put forward some questions to Rupam about her fabulous new collection, Chronicles of Entering My Body. Let me just get these up on my screen. I've got them prepared here. So, Rupam, what was your starting point with the collection?
Thank you, Linda, for the lovely introduction to Chronicles of Entering My Body. It has been a wonderful and stimulating experience working with you. Thank you. Bone Journey, most definitely, because that's a poem I wrote about 2 years ago. And usually what happens is when you write a poem, you know that, that's it now, it's complete. But somehow something told me that it's not done. And I needed to explore the idea a lot more, the idea of the physical body as against the spirit of whether it is a person or whether it is in nature or the earth. And I knew that there would be a series of poems that would follow. Thank you. Yes, I'll start with that. And Bone Journey. There's an art to arranging bones, laying them together by way of size, shape, density to form a human body. You need to be careful where the sternum crosses the chest or the rib cage cloisters sit, bearing the weight of what pulses within. You need to trail blood streams before deciding if they bear the smell of love or human failure. You need to walk slowly at first, navigating the tendons or ligaments that bind the flesh of insurmountable hunger and of longing. Weigh them all against the number of breaths exhaled and inhaled in one day. Walk gently upon the brittleness of the skeleton that props up an entire bulk, makes it look more human than it really is. If it's the head you're after, then tread carefully. Count all your steps within, sometimes aloud, sometimes sotto voce, in keeping with the rhythms of your measure. For should you miss a footing, you'll plunge backwards into an abyss of darkness. It's a matter of circumnavigating, really. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Slow, ever so slow, as if your whole life depended on it.
How did you approach the sequencing of the collection?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because it's quite difficult actually to collate your works and make a story out of it, out of poems that you've written, because they're scattered all over the place. And when you finally finished, I've realized that I approach my work in the same way as carving, because when you do that, you start at a middle point or the center. Some people start with the nose and then they move all the way around, and then the body, if it's a human body that they're working on, starts to take shape. And this is exactly what I did, because as I'd mentioned, the bone journey, I knew that it was a journey of the human body or the physical body or the earth, and it moves forward and into the torso and the limbs, and And also with the human body, there is the spirit part of it. So I knew that I would start with the physical as well as the spiritual, and these two would move parallelly along. So I put my poems in such a way. I think that's how I did it. So there's no hard and fast rule about the way one does it. But I think I did get somewhere out there.
Your work is so vivid and visceral and full of sensation, and you manage to run that parallel with the unwrapping of so much from everyday life and relationships, like a miraculous thread leading us through the complexities of the everyday. Are you always drawing on that type of inspiration for your work, or does it come in waves?
That's a really beautiful question. And thank you so much for your visceral and insightful response, Linda. I think I'll have to answer that in parts. So for the first part, I think, yes, I do draw from incidents around me and from relationships. What I have realized, because I think I do that subconsciously, and I think it is really, really important to be aware and to be living in that daily life of whether it is domestic or your work related or relationships, in order to understand the complexities, because what can be more complex than living than this daily grind, if I can call it that. But yes, that is very much there. And I've noticed that ideas do stem from such incidents or relationships of the everyday. But again, having said that, I'm not a very reflexive writer, in the sense that any thought or idea that comes to me, I do not act upon it, or I'm not impulsive at all. I take that seed and allow that to gestate. And then I see that if it does have, if it does stay with me, because there's some that, you do have ideas and then they move on. Or you forget about it the next day. But if something has actually made home inside of me, then I know that I've got to work on it. And that's the second part, I suppose, of what you asked me, where I do my research, because I believe very, very strongly in my research work. Because if there's anything, for example, if I've written about tightrope walking, then I want to read a lot about it. I want to read about the mechanics of tightrope walking. And then if I've written about dragon wisdom, then I want to, and which is about the bamboo tree. So I want to read all I can about that bamboo tree. So surprisingly enough, for this particular collection, there's another huge incident that played a very important part. And I was researching for a short story that I was writing, and the NM Wadia hospital in Pune gave me that permission, and Dr. Ashish Kanijo, who's a cardiac surgeon, very kind of them all, to give me the permission to actually witness an open heart surgery. It was a mitral valve replacement surgery of a woman. And I stood there in the operation theatre. This was something that I'd always wanted to do. And I watched this entire team, and it was like an orchestra, so beautifully done. And I watched them enter the body of this woman and reach her heart. I saw the beating heart lying in its pool of blood, and then they worked on it, repaired it, and sutured it back whole again. And the very next day, I met up with this lady, the next day it was, or 2 days later, and she was smiling. And I think that was the most transcendental moment, witnessing that operation and seeing this woman smiling later on and drawing parallels between the body and entering of people or entering a body, if I can call it that, and that soul or the spirit part of human existence. So surprisingly enough, even though this was for a short story, I think a large number of my poems have been written or have been inspired by this huge event. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. The enigma of being stillborn. I was aborted in my mother's belly one too many times, I'm told. I was stillborn one day, then born again, spewing like magma from a womb, as though the finality of birthing were all there was to it. And I've long flown places she's called home in order to navigate my own. And I haven't arrived yet, because arriving is just another word for going away, she once told me. Once I was a clod of mud when she held me in her arms, the first time she held me. I've sprouted eyes wide enough to trail the transatlantic since. My limbs turned to yellow plumes midday. I dissolve to ether in black evenings, and morns I rise a silver gold in the hope of a newer day, and that's every day. I watch my mother's eyes watch me. They furrow miles on to seek me out. And I hear her voice, still as Lethe must be down there, yet ricocheting from the umbilicus that housed us both once. I've swum over and over in silence the lagoons she swam in. I've run off, often wept upon their shores with the ebb and flow of the daily tides. And yes, I have smelt those stronger scents of the slumbers she pressed upon my forehead back then, when witches sprang out of the black and rainbows were wishes. I often think of the earth and its legs spread out wide, cavernous, like my mother's own, and of when she'd birthed us all once upon. And I often wonder if that's the way back home again. And I wonder also if the earth's dampened pores and its spores can keep her well and warm, for it's 2 winters since we left her there. I stand at my bedroom window now and watch the woman next door splay her laundry and peg it on her clothesline like they were children she were bathing and hanging out to dry. And every so often she looks at me and waves. She laughs aloud, tells me they're not going to unclasp themselves and blunder into my garden anymore.
There are 7 images within the book. As we know, you are an artist as well and a sculptor. Can you talk about those images and about the choice of placing them?
All the artworks in the collection are standalone and certainly not illustrations to the poems or to the chapters or the sections. I write through the day. and usually make my way to the studio after 5 or 6:30 in the evening, where I pick up on the work that I'm doing, whether it's an acrylic or oil painting or sometimes sculpture. And in between, I work on watercolors, where these sudden watercolors come to me, and I find them quite close to the poems that I write in their spontaneity. So they are the artworks in the collection are mostly watercolors, which I have worked on around the same time that I've been writing the poems. And what I realized later, when one thinks about it, is that even if I wasn't aware of it, perhaps subconsciously, the very ideas that were playing on my mind, or the ones that I was dealing with in my poems, might have been reflected in the artworks. So I chose artworks that were painted around the same time as the poems that I was working on. But having said that, this is not true of the sculpture, Safe Place, that I've put alongside the dedication page, because this is one that I had worked on a couple of years ago. And it was during a time when I felt deeply connected to my mum, who was going through a difficult time back in India. And also, I was feeling deeply connected with my daughter, who was at university then. So that was done around that time. And about the Vitruvian woman, that is something that is quite different when compared to the others, the other artworks. And the poem is a long one, divided into 7 parts, and inspired by the 7 chakras in our body. And the artwork is inspired by Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. But then, of course, my own interpretation of both the chakras as well as Da Vinci's artworks. So so what really happened with this one was I'm in the habit of sketching or drawing during our family time in the evenings when all of us sit in front of the TV. And I found myself working on sketch after sketch, trying to get at something which even I didn't quite understand, because that was around the same time as the poem that I was writing. And somehow I felt that abstracting the female form into the bare, minimal, geometrical shapes and lines and triangles, all converging into a lotus in full bloom, somehow helped me resolve the very ideas that I was working on related to the poem. So that happens to me sometimes, where if I'm working on a piece of writing, then I like to draw and I like to draw, even though I might not use that drawing, but then it helps me unravel certain ideas. So, and also, I feel that that answers one of the questions that you'd asked me earlier about the sequencing of the poems. So basically, all the poems are standalone, but they're pulled together in such a way that if one were to read the first one, starting with Bone Journey and all the way through, and the collection culminates into the Vitruvian Woman, then it would tell a story.
Several of the poems have what appear to be subtitles underneath in parentheses. Can you talk a little about why that approach felt important to your work?
I've always felt that a poem doesn't or shouldn't tell. It should just say. So I feel that if a poem stirs something in its readers, then it has done its work. So rather than talk about what the poem is about within the poem, and rather than building a base, I remember you used the word whisper when you referred to the parenthesis when we were talking about it sometime. And I really liked that. So I feel that, if I can call it a whisper, so the subtitles within the parenthesis are like whispers that are simply letting a person know what they are about to read.
The image on the front cover of the book is absolutely beautiful, and it calls one into its interior, perfect for the title, Chronicles of Entering My Body. Was that always the perfect choice for the cover, or how long did it take to arrive at it?
Yes, that's an exciting question. And it took us a while to get there, but it was a collaborative effort, of course. And I remember initially I had several images from different paintings of mine which covered the entire page. And then whilst we were speaking, you and I, you mentioned that it would be wonderful to have an image which seemed like someone were looking through a half-open door or a slit. And then we started working on it, and I spoke with Rupam Baoni from Lemon Design, who is the designer and who's done the cover design, of course. So he embraced the idea, and he came up with this, after having read my poems, he came up with this idea of the third eye, or the intuitive part of us. So he we did. It was a hit and try. We tried out several images, and we came to this particular one, which thanks to him for his brilliant vision and your amazing idea. So we did get there. So I'm glad you liked it.
Thank you.
Tightrope walking, also called funambulism, is the skill of walking a thin wire or rope with or without a balancing pole, or even safety nets for that matter. And I saw this man tightrope above the river Seine once. He was up there at a height of 82 feet, moving across the waters for 30 minutes, taut with concentration, contemplating his core, centering or decentering, alternating weight between his limbs, torso and other parts in order to equipoise, to harmonize his body mass with a support base so he didn't fall headlong into the waters below. And sometimes he was nimble as a cat, even squirrel-like, like the one I'd watched skitter over our clothesline one time, performing its many feats, whilst on its nut foraging mission from the feeder we'd hung up there as a ploy for our summer amusement. The tightrope walker did it for thrills he lived by, and he spoke of how the bated breath of the audiences, their gasps, inflated his lungs and heart every time he inched forward, and how the feeling was akin to being in love with someone belonging to another, and how he felt he'd now understood the crux of survival and of the final fall, and that he'd touched that point of life where science bedded with the arts, and how living was all about the act of balancing and all the way through. I'd seen another walk across 2 skyscrapers 600 feet above and partly blindfolded. I've studied the science behind the act and how poles help, how the moment of inertia is determined by the length of the prop in use. And I've learned how I perform my tightropes each day, angling my steps forward in my day-to-day, my family, the love of my folks gravitating towards me all the time. And how I still hold you in my sleep every night, whilst he wraps his arms about my waist and sinks into sleep. If I edge away now, he will plunge into an abyss. We all will. And the funny thing is, there's no scope of a safety net here, and the fall is great and inevitable. Free fall, the physicists call it.